The Japanese had occupied Manchuria with such ease that by the mid-1930s, Japan's militarists agitated for further expansion. That impulse was tempered by fears of the Soviet Union and its troops garrisoning the frontier with Manchuria. Expansion would come, the more moderate officers in power determined, but only after the Soviet threat had been eliminated. But in 1937, an incident occurred that ensured war between China and Japan.
There was a company of Japanese troops out on night maneuvers near Peking's Marco Polo Bridge that came under small arms fire. The interesting thing is nobody really knows who fired those first shots, whether they were Maoist insurgents trying to start this war between the nationalists and the Japanese, or nationalist Chinese troops that were jittery who just opened fire.
Both sides tried to contain the fighting, but from this isolated episode, one of history's most merciless wars would result. In Tokyo, the Japanese cabinet tried to contain the Marco Polo Bridge incident, but they believed war with China was premature as long as the Soviet threat remained. At the end of July, the local Japanese commander in North China unilaterally ordered the Chinese to withdraw from Peking. When they refused, the Japanese launched an attack that killed 5,000 Chinese troops in a single day. Retaliation came swiftly. The next day, a Chinese peacekeeping force in the area murdered its Japanese liaison officers, then massacred some 230 Japanese civilians living in the area. Infuriated by the killings, the Japanese launched a full-scale offensive that captured Peking and threatened all of northern China.
The emperor was very concerned as to what was going on. So he actually directly intervened and told his government to make peace. So a delegation was sent to China with the intent of ending the mess that was going on. And while they were there, a further incident took place where 2 Japanese naval officers were shot and killed at the Shanghai airport by Chinese sentries. And that scotched any attempts at peace. At that point, at the end of August, open warfare as a result.
Although ill-equipped, the Chinese fought tenaciously, inflicting heavy losses on the Japanese. Nevertheless, Japan's ground forces advanced steadily toward the Chinese capital of Nanking. As the armies clashed, Japanese planes carpet-bombed the city, hoping to cow Chiang Kai-shek into ending the war.
Once things in China really spun out of control, the Imperial Army decided they were going to end it as quickly as possible, and to do that, they were going to terrorize and brutalize the Chinese into submission.
In early December, Washington ordered the American embassy in Nanking evacuated. Amid the mounting chaos, the gunboat USS Panay steamed up the Yangtze River to Nanking and rescued the embassy staff along with a group of Western journalists. On the return trip downriver, Japanese aircraft, without warning or provocation, deliberately attacked the American vessel. Using World War I-era machine guns, the American sailors fought back desperately as the Japanese made repeated attacks on their vessel. For 20 minutes, the Japanese planes strafed and bombed the Panay. When they pulled off target, they left the American ship crippled and sinking. 3 men had been killed in the attack and 11 others wounded. The sinking of the Panay might well have touched off a war between the U.S. and Japan, but the Japanese quickly announced the attack had been a mistake.
The Japanese government and people wish to express their sincerest and profoundest regrets to the American government and people on account of this deplorable incident.
Anxious to avoid war, America gladly accepted Japan's apology. The day after the attack on the Panay, Nanking fell to the Japanese army. What follows ranks as one of the greatest atrocities in human history. In an orgy of bloodletting, torture, and rape, Japanese soldiers murdered over 200,000 Chinese civilians. Girls as young as 6 and women as old as 80 were raped in the streets while their families stared on in horror. Mutilated bodies littered the streets. Helpless men were used for bayonet practice, and thousands were beheaded in gruesome Japanese torture games. The Japanese rape of Nanking horrified the world. International condemnation followed, but again, no nation, aside from China herself, proved willing to stand up to the Japanese.
I wish to bring a message from the women of war-ridden China. If you wish to avoid the calamities that are befalling China now, and the killing and mutilation of your loved ones and your fellow beings, boycott Japanese goods.
In America, a Gallup poll showed that 70% of likely voters favored a complete withdrawal from Asia. FDR, knowing that to do so would mean abandoning the Philippines to Japanese plunder, refused to consider such action.
We are adopting such measures as will minimize our risk of involvement, but we cannot have complete protection in a world of disorder in which confidence and security have broken down.
Through the 1930s, American businesses enjoyed a vigorous trade relationship with Japan. Finished goods from the U.S. poured onto the Japanese waterfront, as did the majority of the critical raw materials required by Japanese industry. Some 80% of its oil came from the United States.
1930s, obviously, Great Depression. U.S. industry needs customers desperately, and here is Japan purchasing petroleum. Well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to tell, this customer at a time you're desperately looking for customers, we're going to cut you off from our exports?
American resources were being turned into weapons of war and used against the Chinese. FDR saw this as intolerable, but knew that if he ordered sanctions placed on Japan, a war for which America was not ready would probably be the result.
After Nanking and the Panay incidents, FDR quietly writes to the CEOs of all the companies in the U.S. doing business with the Japanese, and he asks them to curtail their trade with Japan, which most of them actually did, including Standard Oil.
When the Japanese discovered what FDR had done, it aroused considerable alarm in Tokyo. Should the spigot of American oil be cut off, Japan's economy would be ruined. In response, the Army and Navy began to cast their eyes around Asia, looking for sources of oil that could be conquered should the Americans impose sanctions. They came up with two alternatives: go north and take the Siberian oil fields from Russia, or go south and take the Dutch East Indies away from the Netherlands. In time, Japan would try both options, with bloody consequences that would lead to global war.